Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's broadcast of the highly regarded subject of data governance. We have a great webcast entitled The 12 Ways to Govern Marketing Content in a Complex Organization. So before we get started, we have just a few items to cover. So this is a fast track webinar. What's that mean? It means to hold on tight for the next 30 minutes. We love questions, so feel free to pop those into the question pane and we'll do our best to answer those live. Because this is a short webinar, if we don't have time to address them tonight, we guarantee that we'll get those answered for you within the next 24 hours. Also, this session is being recorded, so be sure to check your inbox tomorrow. You'll be getting a follow-up email from me, Deb Simons, with the link to the recording, the slides, and we also have an offer for all of today's attendees. But we're going to tell you about that a little later during the broadcast, and it's really cool. So let's jump in. What I'd like to do is begin with an introduction of today's presenters. Our first presenter is Stephen Diorio. He is the founder of the Brand Publishing Institute. Stephen is an established authority in sales and marketing innovation. He helps over 100 global organizations from IBM to DuPont to Janus Capital using advanced marketing and sales approaches to grow faster and most importantly, more profitably. Stephen works with Grant Butler, who I'll introduce in a second, and an expert team. He's created a brand publishing curriculum and textbook that leading marketers like yourself are using to manage the consistency, the cost, and complexity of content operations and really creating content that drives growth. So welcome, Stephen. We also have Grant Butler. Grant Butler, he is the managing director of the Editor Group, joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia. So a little bit of background. The Editor Group is a leading corporate writing and content marketing firm with offices worldwide in Sydney, Singapore, and New York, as well as corporate clients around the world as well. He's written a book called Think, Write, Grow, which is about thought leadership content. And before starting the Editor Group, Grant was a reporter with the Australian Financial Review newspaper. And as many of you know me, I'm Deb Simons, Senior Director of Marketing at Acrolinx. So with that, let's jump in.
Thanks, Deb. Appreciate it. So I'll lead off. I'm Steve Diorio. I'm the director of the Brand Publishing Institute, and we developed a lot of research that I want to share with you today. So let's start off with, why do you even care about this notion of content governance? Why is the view worth the climb? Well, there are three reasons. First of all, content is now essential to 100% of the executive growth agenda at almost every company we work with. So we did a research with hundreds of CMOs, interviewed them, surveyed them, and we put that into our brand publishing bootcamp curriculum, which Deb will offer you at the end of this call. But if you look at this, if you ask a CMO the importance of organized, well-designed, and high-quality content, it impacts the brand. It impacts sales and their productivity. It helps leverage mobile, social, and digital channels, enable personalization, differentiate the brand experience, sell value, which every sales organization is trying to do, and enable omni-channel selling. So suffice to say, content impacts 100% of the CMO's growth agenda. Second issue is, there are a lot of people creating content. So our benchmarks show that for the average $500 million corporation in our survey, there are over 150 people creating content. Many of these folks do not work for the chief marketing officer, like product marketing, skills development, and service. In addition, many of these don't even work for the company, like agencies, as well as third-party content curators and contributors. So, Grant, you work with dozens of large organizations. Why don't you color in this picture a little bit with real companies?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I mean, the really big thing here is, if you're an external agency, it's so hard to know what the governance structure is inside the large organization and what the rules are. So we'll dive a bit more into depth with some specific firms later, but it's a huge and complex story, and that CMO is almost like the editor of a newspaper, sitting there with all these different people coming in on different bases, and that's why this whole governance topic is so important.
And the third issue is that this is owned by corporate marketing, specifically the CMO. Most CMOs we interview admit that they own, whether they like it or not, the planning, creation, control over the consistency, quality, compliance, the management and distribution and measurement of content. In fact, 93% of the chief marketing officers we interviewed said, like it or not, I'm a publisher. I need to be a publisher and own this across the organization. But publishing is hard. And CMOs tell us, I used to read every piece of customer-facing content that left my organization. I can't possibly do that. I need to now localize, coordinate content across dozens or hundreds of geographies, product organizations, and silos. And so managing content across a large, siloed global organization is near impossible. And so how do you do it? Well, if you think about the federal government, they govern to some degree 300 million people in the United States, and they do that with a variety of tools, legislative tools like laws, governance, executive tools like presidential edict, and representative tools, like legislation. And they balance each other. So when we think about governance, you cannot control everything in an organization, but you can put in place a varied set of structures, tools, skills, and solutions that provide corporate marketing key points of control over quality, compliance of content across the organization. It involves a mix of competencies, basic tools like targeting taxonomies, brand approval checklists, editorial guidelines, management approaches that help refresh and manage content over time, and systems that automate the workflow and facilitate collaboration across hundreds of people. So to make this real, we talk to CMOs. As I mentioned, they can't possibly read everything. CMOs tell us that they cannot be a dictator. You cannot dictate creativity. You cannot tell people in the local market what those local sensitivities are, and you certainly can't tell a product manager the value story for their product. And so you've got to pick your spots. And if we look at a CMO like Matthew Schiffman at Legg Mason, he's picked a few spots. He's decided to focus on architecture, creating a blueprint of thematic programs and swim lanes so that his writers and his marketers and salespeople are actually keeping their message within some guidelines. He's also created an editorial basis for planning content in the future. He's moving towards metrics. Content isn't useful unless it's found, used, and consumed, and drives response and sales. So he started to measure things like take rate and usage and align them with his sales and customer journey. Finally, he's looking at systems. In his case, he's put in place a web CMS system where he's able to put, tag, target, and manage content from all the organization.
Thanks, Steve. I think just to chip in on a few of those challenges that we're seeing with the CMOs, I think the really big one is just defining the internal workflows that people really have a system from content creation through to distribution. And then I think being able to publish quickly and with some confidence. But the real, and also being able to get material out the door quickly enough that it's seen as timely and people want to read it. And finally, just, giving guys like Matthew there at Legg Mason that you spoke to, enough time to really slow down and read the content or view the content. There was a famous editor at Bloomberg called Matthew Winkler, who has just been so responsible for their quality over all their years. And I think the CMO has got to be able to put themselves in that position.
So the CMO is a publisher. The CMO owns editorial. And the CMO ultimately is responsible for governing content quality, consistency, and compliance across the brand. So we talked about levers and picking your spots. What this program is about is 12 levers that marketing organizations can put in place to give them some degree of control over these aspects. These involve people, structures, and systems. These draw from the software world. They draw from editorial constructs being used in the publishing world, and they draw from best practices that are being deployed in leading content organizations. So we'll talk about these today, and Deb will give you a full online class that goes into detail on all of these, because we just don't have enough time to give them the treatment. But let's start with this notion of structures. So, you can't build a house without a blueprint. So we'll talk about this notion of content architecture, or swim lanes, or guidelines that make the content hang together. We'll talk about a universal targeting taxonomy. You can't use content unless it can be found. You can't contextualize content and target it unless there's a persona. It's not relevant unless it addresses a pain point, and it doesn't drive sales unless it supports the sales process. So 47% of organizations we looked at are focusing on taxonomy, which is an organizing and targeting construct to get their arms around it. A lot of organizations are investing in content performance measurement. Others are creating traffic cop roles and rules so that content can be distributed across over a dozen marketing, media, and sales touchpoints. So let's look at a high level of what we mean by this notion of a blueprint or architecture. A good architecture takes the brand or value message, that's the big boulder at the top. Most organizations are really good at that, and breaks it down so that organizations can create content, assets, pebbles, white paper, collateral, videos, or even elements, which are elements that feed into and are assembled into those assets. And the connective tissue in the middle are conversation templates or plays that direct real conversations with lips moving, assembled into pitch books or emails or campaigns or presentations. And so that's the trick, is to take what marketers do well, which is articulate big messages and themes, and break it down so that hundreds or even thousands of people inside and outside the organization can create these assets, and they can all hang together. So Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about how your clients are making this type of thing operational and how they're putting structures in place?
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, I think the thing is, when you come in as the writers and the editors, whether you're inside the organization or outside, there's a point where this has to become real, and you need some real practical tools. The first big one is a style guide. So some sort of guide to how you're going to write material, or how you're going to produce videos or produce audio and so forth. And that should be quite detailed, and it should really tie back to those core selling themes and value messages and the brand. And then that messaging step is just being really clear about what the go-to-markets are at any point in time, and be able to tie those back. The taxonomy is just really about being able to classify all the different elements, so blogs and news updates and reports, into what material is internal, what material is external. And then finally, if you can embed all those rules into templates, it's a fantastic tool for everybody, and it's a really good way for the organization and the CMO to keep control. So it really specific, defining headline links, defining body copy links, defining how things will be written, and just so all those rules that you've spent all that time creating are right there in front of content producers as they're trying to work.
So if we walked into the Chicago Tribune, you could point at a shelf and you will see a document and a guide that dictates all these things. Further, every writer at the newspaper understands and embraces them. The best companies, the companies working with Grant, are doing the same for them, and we'll talk about that more. So now let's talk about systems. Technology can help. It's not the complete answer. A robot will not write great content, but certainly they can help. And the way it helps is two ways. It automates workflow. There is a process that takes a very long time that involves a lot of expensive people. We can automate that to save time. The big expense item is management time, lawyer time, review time, and speed to market. The basis of competition today is respond to the market fast, and bad publishing processes move slowly. And the market opportunity is past. or the competitor beat you. So speed and management time are incredible. The second thing is you cannot automate creativity, but you can facilitate collaboration, which leads to great stuff. And so if we've proven that there are hundreds of people involved in the process, all with a different role, planning, creating, visualizing, editing, approving, we can make that collaboration more seamless and avoid 6 people screwing in a light bulb at any given time, which is the way I would describe the way content is created in most manual operations. So when you look at this, to facilitate these things, there are software, content, marketing systems, content automation platforms. There's a variety of them. They're in our curriculum that help you automate the approval workflow, help automate auditing. There is software we'll talk a little bit more about that can actually control and manage the quality of content against standards, against the brand architecture. There's also software people are using to get control of content. 51% of marketers are putting their content in one place to create a single source of truth. Now that's literally an impossibility to get every piece of content in one place, but the goal of tagging the content, figuring out where it is, and trying to get it under control is very, very important because 99% of content isn't even used more than once. So knowing what you have, knowing where to find it, knowing where to audit it is really important. And so there's any number of software systems that can do that. Now, what I'd like to have Grant talk about, which I find interesting, is this notion that with advances in linguistics and algorithms, you can literally use software to control the voice, the quality, the standards, the tenor of the content being created across large global organizations with literally thousands of people in different countries writing. Grant, you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, fantastic. And look, that's why we're here doing an Acrolinks webinar. The Acrolinks tool is so powerful for really reading content and you being able to train it as to what it's looking for. So if you look at this slide at a basic level, we're looking at spelling and grammar and style issues. But then there's this really interesting section here called voice, where it's looking at how readable something is, which is all about clarity and quality, but also things that go to tone, like informality and liveliness and so on. So we use Acrolinks within our own agency, and a lot of our clients use it. At a basic level, you're trying to control for terms, you know, that all the brand terminology and titles and things are used correctly. And then at a more advanced level, you're trying to get a consistency in voice. So if you've got a really lively brand, then that's coming across in all the material. Or if you actually don't like to use things like contractions, like can't and so forth, they're too informal, then it'll pick up on those things too. So yeah, it's but you know, the big premise here with content governance is organizations are trying to generate lots of smaller pieces of content, and how do you get that stuff out the door? And the idea of a tool like Acrolinks or lots of the others that are in the brand publishing suite is to get some help from the machines to get that material done.
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things I want to emphasize is no one of these levers is a silver bullet. And in fact, every organization has to choose its own mix of levers based on their points of control and how autocratic or controlling they want to be. But this system can check your writing against an audience, Australian English versus American English versus Canadian English, and a style guide like the Chicago Tribune. But where it really starts to move the needle and transform the marketing approach is when you combine this with the standards that Grant talked about earlier. Because now we're evaluating every written word while it's being written in audits inside and then mapping that quality and effectiveness to impact. We're looking at every document and literally mapping it up against the standards and the voice and the themes that are in the content architecture, literally giving you control. So the combination of an editorial agenda, which we'll talk about, and standards and styles and linguistic software can be powerful and replace almost reading every document or improve upon it because it's empirical and it's real time. So now let's talk to the people side of the equation. So if you think about newspapers like the New York Times, or magazines like the Financial Times or Forbes, they have hundreds or thousands of writers. Forbes has 3,000 contributors that are managed. Yet you'll see their editorial teams are relatively small, numbering in the dozens. And the way they do that is an editor is a quality control function. And an editorial construct gives them control over beat writers and third-party contributors. Journalism skills are a means of control. It's not very hard to edit people's writing if they're good writers. So organizations are pulling in experts from CNN, newspapers. I think Dun & Bradstreet, the CMO, Rishi Dave there, just hired somebody from Time Magazine to try to bring that magic, those storytelling skills, that journalistic discipline into the organization, creating specialized functions. So again, if you know how to write and if you know about journalism, it's not so hard to manage you. And then finally, we're looking at this whole notion of procurement and sourcing. If you look at an organization, it's like a factory. You're getting pieces of content from hundreds of people, thousands of pieces of content. Why not act like the Apple App Store or a purchasing agent at manufacturing? If the stuff comes up to the factory, it's not the right shape, it's not tagged properly, it's not organized properly, it's not on message, then you don't put it in the App Store. Let's stop the garbage in, garbage out problem at its root cause and actually apply purchasing disciplines which are native to marketing organizations to content to make sure that we're writing the right stuff. It's tagged so we can find it, it's on message, and it's actually aligned with the sales process and on the message. So these are some simple things people are doing. Let me show you how this organization evolves. I mentioned earlier that 93% of CMOs now say that they're a publisher. And what most of them are doing are putting somebody in charge of content operations. And they're taking an end-to-end view of the process, from planning to sourcing to management to optimization and measurement. And establishing that process, putting measurements in place, and automating that process. On the other side of the house is an editorial construct. There's an editor-in-chief. Sometimes it's the ex-head of corporate communications. Sometimes it's somebody who came out of digital marketing. But whoever it is, they are trying to pull together a cross-functional team of their traditional voices, corporate communications and the ad agencies, but they're trying to bring in subject matter experts from product marketing, practice areas, territory leaders, so that we can get that localized input. And importantly, sales, service, sales training, and the sales value methodology. Because at the end of the day, if I'm writing a piece of content, why shouldn't it be used in a conversation, as well as online in media or in own digital assets? And they're starting to create editors who run validation content. By that we mean case studies, ROI models, industry content. One of the key tenets of personalization is pulling up industry-specific content and serving that up in a presentation on our webpage. Thought leadership is now the key to branding and differentiation and delivering value. And this whole notion of value stories. Relationship selling doesn't work. Everybody wants a value story that's disruptive and different and changes people's minds. And at the bottom of this, we have dozens, hundreds, or even millions of contributors. When I say millions, I'm talking about a company like GoPro, the video company, whose 80% of their marketing content on the digital website comes from customers who are filming that content. And they're able to pull that all together and collect it seamlessly. So that's a construct that we're seeing. How that
Steve,
works.
I might just add there, Steve, that this org chart is perhaps one of the most controversial debates inside many of our client organizations, because what you have is this collision of traditional marketing and traditional corporate affairs coming together around this idea that everyone has to publish, and a lot of the publishing looks similar between traditional corporate affairs and traditional marketing functions, and the digital teams as well. So I'm sure many CMOs looking at that chart and an editorial-led structure would be quickly trying to do the calculus on how much change might be required. But you know, this is really at the heart of what needs to change.
Thanks, Grant. And to combine elements, how can I get all those people working together? Well, there is software, content marketing platforms that can get the brand team and the agency team and third-party vendors working together around a process, managing approvals, writing, roles, throughput, milestones. The best of these software packages actually call up the person who is holding up the process and ask them to approve, whether they're skiing, eating dinner, or on a plane, because this whole system has to work. So we saw an organizational manifestation, and now you can see how software can facilitate that collaboration. Grant, why don't you talk a little bit about who is doing this well and give us an example?
Yeah, fantastic. Look, one Acrolinx example is Lenovo. So if everyone remember, Lenovo took over IBM's PC business, and Lenovo is a Chinese-based organization, and it's also a very strong content marketing organization. So you can see the challenge here. Chinese language firm internally going out to a global market and needing to do so in English. So a lot of their content producers are not English as a first language. So what they've been able to do with a tool like Acrolinx is have a lot of people producing content, but use then that kind of robotic capability to help iron out any variations in the nature of the English, and also try to get everyone writing much more in line with the Lenovo brand. But what's really nice about the way Acrolinx works in that context is it keeps giving people advice, and so they do become better writers over time. So it's almost like an internal training tool as well. Yeah, and then the proofs in the pudding. Guys like Lenovo are driving sales through successful content marketing. Yeah, so I think they're a great example. You can find the case study itself on the Acrolinx website.
That's a great story about people in China writing and adapting to different markets around the world. So let's wrap up, since we're moving towards the end of the half hour. So how can you take action? We've covered a lot of ground here, and Deb's going to give you information about a textbook and a class that goes into detail on these 12 levers. But in terms of an action plan, think about systematizing the content approval process to avoid gang-tackling milestones and improving speed and limiting management time, which are your two big cost factors. Think about employing content quality control solutions, like we discussed, to give you control across the globe in combination with the standards and the architecture that Grant talked about. There's a huge opportunity to streamline and automate the compliance process, where, again, you have very expensive people involved. Creating a single source of truth, a construct for putting all the content in one place, or at least mapping to where that content is a great leverage point to get control, manage audits, expiration dates. If something changes from a compliance standpoint, you have one place to go. And again, use the 12 levers and the organizational constructs and the roles and processes we've outlined today to put in place a governance model that is not dictatorial, but it picks which spots and areas that you want to control. To make this easy, we're going to give you an online class that walks you through the 12 levers that marketers are using to govern content in a complex organization. That is one of 12 modules in our overall CRM bootcamp, which organizations are using to transform from an advertiser to a marketer. So Deb will talk more about that. And then I want to hand off to Deb and thank Grant and Acrolinx for the opportunity to do this webcast.
Sure. A big thanks to Steve and Grant for this insightful presentation. And so before we close out, just want to talk to you about a few next steps. As you've heard throughout the presentation, we have this great offer for everyone who has attended today's presentation. So Steve and Grant have graciously offered a complimentary online class, which we have talked about throughout the presentation. And so in order to receive this class I'm going to be sending out an email tomorrow. All you have to do is check your inbox. That's all you need to do. And I'll send you the instructions on how you can register for this online class and receive all the different materials. And if you've liked what you've heard today, we ask to share the insights with your colleagues. It's been great information, and certainly people within your organization, if they weren't able to attend this broadcast, will get some great insights on that. As Grant mentioned earlier, Acrolinks has helped several large global brands like Lenovo create content. And here's a quick snapshot of our customers who are using Acrolinks for their content creation efforts. With that, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Remember, open that email tomorrow, and we will see you on the next Acrolinks Fast Track webinar. So good day, everybody. And again, thanks for your time.